Agatha All Along is everything that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is not. In fact, this spin-off show that follows WandaVision's main antagonist Agatha Harkness, that literal witch, succeeds where so many current Marvel properties either turn out to be fine or indulge in Marvel Studios' worst impulses like, say, Secret Invasion. So yeah, Agatha All Along is a very creative counteroffer for those who are tired of the same bog-standard MCU fare. And admittedly, this will take a little bit of time to explain. Mostly because, in order to explain why Agatha All Along works, I need to dive into the current state of the Marvel Cinematic Universe so I can play doctor and give this franchise a midlife diagnosis. Spoiler alert, it has herpes. See, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been stuck in a bit of a creative rut as of late. If anything, most MCU movies and shows range from being bad to just being fine. Hell, even the good modern MCU films and series aren't all that noteworthy, with the exception of director James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, a movie that had emotional sincerity within its goofy sci-fi pulp visage, as well as being a rare MCU movie that feels more personal, the type that feels like it was crafted with care by a human being, more so than just being clinically constructed by a studio. Because make no mistake, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 might technically be a Marvel Studios production, but it is undeniably identifiable as a film by James Gunn.
Please, James Gunn, sit on me!
But aside from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, there haven't really been that many MCU projects that have wowed me as of late. Sure, Hawkeye, Doctor Strange 2, Loki, Spider-Man No Way Home, Ms. Marvel, and Shang-Chi The Legend of the Ten Rings were good and had entertainment value, but they weren't films that upended what a Marvel Studios production could be, and weren't movies you'd be praising from atop a mountain. Because honestly, no one desires to muster the effort to preach how these movies or series altered how we look at the MCU. The only exceptions being the aforementioned Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, as well as She-Hulk, because She-Hulk shaked her ass, and I was there for it. Most of these films or series, whether solid or very, very bad like the earlier mentioned Secret Invasion, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, or Thor Love and Thunder, there is this sense that these films follow a Marvel movie template. Admittedly, it is more complicated than that because there are often differences within the similarities, and the quality of the execution varies depending on the film, but overall, yes, there is a template for storytelling structure here. A sameness that even undermines the solid to good MCU movies. Movies that I enjoyed at release, but soured upon to varying extents due to there just being way too many Marvel films that adhere to that earlier mentioned template on some level. And for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the template is fairly straightforward. The movies and shows usually follow a morally faulty main character, dad ass of Captain America notwithstanding, as they embark on an epic adventure that is tonally in the realm of fun, with a lot of wisecracks, jokes, Easter eggs that reference other Marvel properties, the minimization of LGBTQ representation, and the most explosive action that people can animate via a computer, meaning that these are just movies meant to be enjoyed while shoving overpriced, stale popcorn down your gullet. Sure, these projects have moments of emotional sincerity as they want us to care about the characters and the beefy narrative stakes, though this all falls flat in the bad Marvel movies like Thor Love and Thunder, which has tonal whiplash given that it's a movie that takes little seriously to the point that its main character is the butt of the joke, all while simultaneously featuring a storyline where Natalie Portman is dying of cancer. Because nothing says a jolly good time like cancer. But by the end, even in the good movies, much MCU fare is all about being fun to the point of not always challenging its audience, even though these films sometimes broach tough subjects like geopolitical conflicts, the messy aspects of the military-industrial complex, and trying to have a working relationship with Ed Norton. They generally only go so far when representing these conflicts. There are exceptions, of course, but as a rule of thumb, the MCU doesn't rock the boat too often in terms of its conflicts and villains. After all, there's a lot of Marvel Cinematic Universe shows with sympathetic villains who cross a moral yellow piss line in the snow to the point that they are eventually disposed of without ever bringing them or their said sympathetic cause up again, as if they were banished to the Phantom Zone. Yes, I'm aware that's a DC reference, but I'm gonna pull a Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania and not give a And that's even if the villains were sympathetic to begin with, mostly because many Marvel villains are one note and have little personality or nuances besides being the villain, like whoever the hell this is supposed to be. Like, I'm not being facetious here. Who the is that? And while sure, I'm okay with villains being evil and lacking redeemable qualities, but they do need to feature a sense of presence and identifiable quirks that make them human despite also being evil. Think less Mark Zuckerberg and more Elon Musk. There needs to be a pathos and an ethos and presence aside from being a shitty person. For example, one of the best MCU villains, and not villain turned anti-hero like Loki, but an actual villain, is the High Evolutionary in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And yeah, I'm aware that I keep praising that movie's excellence as if it took me out for dinner and then me speechless, but Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is worth every single platitude. See, the High Evolutionary is a contemptible presence who creates conscious beings yet casts them aside like their own wants, needs, and lives are worthless. He casually commits genocide and animal cruelty, yet he does this all in the goal of creating perfect beings and a perfect society. In other words, he is a great villain with a clear purpose behind his evil actions and is notable in his moral depravity in comparison to more run-of-the-mill Marvel villains. You know, because no one gives a shit about Mads Mikkelsen's character from Doctor Strange. Furthermore, the stakes of these movies are often similar. They revolve around the fates of cities, the world, the universe, the multiverse, and the verse chorus verse. If anything, these stakes are bigger than the ones in Texas, meaning that everything is a city-destroying or world-ending threat, which cease to make those, on paper, grand stakes feel special, seeing as they have now become commonplace in these movies. Kind of like cringy in-movie advertising. Additionally, the climaxes for these conflicts feel repetitive at this point, mostly because in combination of the similar stakes and same lackluster villains, there are generally always hordes of enemies our heroes must dispatch via a big final battle, all before ultimately saving the day. Unless that movie is Avengers Infinity War, because in that movie, Earth's mightiest heroes may as well have been Earth's mightiest ups. So yeah, a lot of Marvel movies are just the same old shit in terms of style, tone, and structure. Sure, many of these movies either execute those creative goals well, or do have creative flourishes inherent to some of the filmmakers behind them. See the Marvel movies by Ryan Coogler, Taika Waititi, James Gunn, and Sam Raimi. But ultimately, Marvel usually doesn't deviate from the formula all that much. Hell, even inventive series like WandaVision and its sitcom setting can't help but retread familiar ground in its third act that evolves into a high-stakes epic battle. Granted, these stakes in WandaVision's finale are a more personal mano-a-mano affair, which is fairly quaint in the MCU, yet the battle and resolution of the conflict itself is rather vanilla. It's basically the standard comic book adaptation final boss battle that bookends so many of these affairs, and is not very creative compared to WandaVision's inventive premise and narrative development prior to that aforementioned lackluster ending, meaning that even when creatively inspired, the MCU often regresses back into old habits. It basically necessitates comic book movie rehab. And this brings us back to Agatha All Along. See, this show is fantastic because it upends the concept of the traditional MCU production. Sure, like many MCU properties, it is tonally still fun, has exciting action, references to the broader MCU continuity, and a sense of humor that is the stock and trade of many Marvel Studios productions. But with that said, Agatha All Along is quite possibly the most distinct Marvel show in years, and is so for a few reasons. And no, none of them are due to Marvel's unexplainable love of in-movie advertising that features ice cream.
Then Ben & Jerry's named a flavor after me, so...
Stark raving hazelnuts.
Not bad.
A bit chalky.
Baskin-Robbins always finds out.
A hunk of Hulk burning fudge is our favorite.
What is it with Marvel and ice cream? The first aspect about Agatha All Along that allows the series to differ from the MCU at large is Agatha herself. And no, it's not just because of actress Kathryn Hahn. Though of course that does work in the show's favor, because you know, Kathryn Hahn is a treasure. She's basically a unicorn of sassiness, but rather the type of protagonist that Agatha is. See, unlike the MCU's roster of flawed heroes, sympathetic anti-heroes, and the pinnacle of moral virtue that is America's ass, Agatha Harkness is a downright villain. Sure, you can empathize with her sense of grief and loss and her wicked sense of humor, because once again, dat sass. But Agatha's goals and motivations revolve around her gaining and acquiring power. If anything, she is overall selfish and has, for the most part, a certain disregard for the lives of others. She is a bad person, a piece of garbage on par with the PlayStation 5 Pro or a Philly cheesesteak. Agatha is just a bad egg, no relation, and even though the show's strong writing and character development crafted Agatha in a way where her villainous characteristics are both entertaining and are from sympathetic origins, she is still a bad person. One that we care for, but one who is morally problematic nonetheless. But hey, who isn't morally compromised and maybe has committed murder? This is America! And this is just so different compared to every other lead character in a Marvel movie. If anything, Agatha is just narratively and thematically distinct, which contrasts with the types of characters we usually see in the MCU. Agatha is just a unique protagonist in the MCU canon. Secondly, Agatha All Along is gay. Like, very gay. It is the gay supreme. In fact, before the premiere of the series, the show's cast encouraged the idea that Agatha All Along would be the queerest show that Marvel has ever done. And they meant it as a compliment, like it should be. With Aubrey Plaza, who plays Rio, more on that in a second, claiming it will be a gay explosion by the end of it. And admittedly, I was a little suspicious of this. After all, Disney, and Marvel is owned by Disney, has burned audiences before when it comes to teasing LGBTQ content in their movies, only for it to be surface level and superficial bullshit that adds little to nothing to the narrative. In past movies, there have been background characters of the same sex kissing, minor supporting characters that are gay, all while the main primary characters are strictly in the hetero zone. There's gay coding, and then there's the supporting or even main characters that are gay, and blink or you'll miss it sorts of LGBTQ portrayals. The type that is often superficial and could easily be edited out, like this pointless sequence in the Beauty and the Beast remake. The type of representation that is basically worthless, except for executives and others to just pat themselves on the back and tell themselves how progressive and forward-thinking they are. Because truly, Disney did more for LGBTQ rights than Stonewall. But then again, it could be worse. Disney could have actively tried to use their de-homosexualization rays to ungayify their characters in the scripting stage, like how the Disney-owned Pixar, in regards to Inside Out 2 and how its character Riley has queer coding, told the writing team to make Riley less gay. Which is ridiculous. No one can make a gay Riley be less gay. And I should know. So yes, I was definitely skeptical when it came to Agatha All Along's cast proclamations in regards to how Agatha All Along would be Marvel's coming out party. The first time it would really embrace LGBTQ stories and protagonists in its continuity, even despite the numerous past instances that Disney has led all of us innocent queer folks astray with its unfulfilled promises of strong LGBTQ representation. Because Disney has rickrolled us with deceptive false gay way too many damn times. Yet with that being said, Agatha All Along actually lives up to its word. The show features plenty of LGBTQ characters and representation, the type that is meaningful, a core part of the character development, and extends to the lead and supporting characters as well. Because, you know, Agatha herself was in a relationship with Aubrey Plaza's Rio Vidal in the past, and yes, quick aside, Aubrey Plaza is perfect in this role. Because, you know, as a witch, she's basically playing herself. And I know that might sound like an insult, but for Aubrey Plaza, that's a compliment. And then there's also Joe Locke's mysterious supporting character referred to as Teen, who is gay. And whether we are discussing Agatha, Rio, or Teen, these are important characters who are queer in the text and whose LGBTQ identities are relevant to both the character development and the narrative as a whole. For a few examples, Teen refers to the fact that he has a boyfriend and shows him romantically being involved with him, meaning that they give each other some adorable smooches. And Agatha and Rio discuss their past romance and embody a dysfunctional relationship after a horrible breakup. But hey, who hasn't been in a relationship that ended in tears, arguments, and the overwhelming feeling that something inside you has just died? Sure, the show's conflict doesn't revolve around those characters being gay, lesbian, or bisexual, but it's an important part of these characters' personal identity to the point that it is relevant when discussing these protagonists' lives and personality quirks. It's important and not just superficial or something that could be edited out or downplayed, because if they were, it would be a detriment to Agatha All Along's character development and emotional heart. Additionally, the LGBTQ characters just befit the fact that this show is about witchcraft. After all, many women who were deemed to differ from societal standard were historically persecuted as being witches, and LGBTQ people are persecuted for similar reasons. And this is important for me, mostly because, spoiler alert, I'm a transgender woman. Don't know if I've mentioned that, like, 500 times. But hey, by the law of transgenderative property, I click with stories about witches inherently, so I overall appreciate that these witches in Agatha All Along are also queer like myself. Gay characters be gay, which is something you can't really say about other Marvel properties. Less the idea about witches, and more regarding the idea of prominent LGBTQ characters inside the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Because by featuring queer characters and plotlines front and center means that the main characters, not just side characters or background characters, can have their own important LGBTQ stories inside the MCU too. To put it bluntly, this representation in the MCU should never be understated. It's important. And thirdly, finally, and arguably most importantly, Agatha All Along stakes are the inverse of the MCU standard operating procedure, which is to say the narrative stakes do not involve saving a city, the world, the universe, the multiverse, or even the metaverse. Instead, Agatha All Along stakes are character-based and dramatically driven. In fact, the fates of Agatha, Teen, Rio, and the rest of the Witch Covenant, Jennifer Kale, Alice Wu Gulliver, Lilia Calderu, and Sharon, aka Mrs. Hart, are really all that's at stake in this show. And it works because the narrative, the thematic presentation of the script, and the writing allow all these characters to stand out, and the performances of the actors all give the audience reasons to care about what happens in the show. It's just much more personal in concept, not requiring a world-ending threat or kidnapping the president to be engaging. If anything, Agatha All Along's dramatic tension is based around the characters and their personal dynamics. Hell, all the leads and the supporting characters get moments to shine. The villainous Agatha has the air of superiority that subtly conceals emotional vulnerability. Teen is trying to discover his origins. Rio is mysterious. Because Aubrey Plaza, we would expect nothing less. Jennifer is a witch whose power has been cut off from her. Alice is traumatized by the death of her mother. Lilia has dissociative problems. And Sharon is played by Deborah Jo Rupp, which is a strong characteristic in and of itself.
Are you trying to kill me?
In other words, Agatha All Along attaches its emotional hooks inside of us, thus causing the audience to be emotionally invested with the events on screen, proving that the show doesn't need a plot about thwarting the destruction of New York City or the end of all life on Earth to get audiences intrigued by its drama, character development, and action. Agatha All Along just trusts that the emotional resonance of its characters creates a more impactful story than larger-than-life stakes by itself. It trusts that the characters are what makes the show special. Just like how having shingles in my 20s makes me special. And we can see this by how Agatha All Along concludes. Which, quick aside, to be clear, what I'm about to say does not constitute as a spoiler. I promise. In most MCU shows, the climaxes involve big epic battles where our heroes engage in physical conflict against armies of enemies. But Agatha All Along diverges from this MCU trope. In fact, the last episode doesn't feature a larger-than-life fight against enemy forces, but instead reveals a big whopper of a plot twist that ultimately results in our protagonists verbally hashing out their grievances. To put it another way, the narrative stakes and character development drive the emotional impact of this conclusion. If anything, Agatha All Along just places trust inside its story, and it results in a conclusion that has actual personal and emotional meaning, rather than yet another gargantuan action spectacle that Marvel has done to death at this point, just like the concept of the multiverse. Yet, in Agatha All Along, the real movie magic was created by the depthful characters who were at a moral impasse. The show believed that a small-scale, character-based conflict, a literal argument, if you will, could alter the fates of those said characters and be more notable and emotionally resonant than just yet another bloated MCU final act. And Agatha All Along and its creators were right. The show delivered arguably one of the most memorable Marvel production final acts to date due to prioritizing the drama, the characters, and the story. It was just very unlike Marvel's standard operating procedure. In conclusion, Agatha All Along upends the Marvel Cinematic Universe's status quo, at least in terms of storytelling. Unlike other Marvel properties, Agatha All Along follows a downright villain, embraces LGBTQ storylines, and favors dramatic narrative stakes over mindless action, overall establishing a very unique take on a Marvel Universe property, a breath of fresh air in a sea of nearly indistinguishable Marvel IP, meaning that Agatha All Along's greatest magic trick was to have its own identity within the MCU.
A hunk of Hulk burning fudge is our favorite.